thanks, and thanks for the invite to come back again. I hadn't realised until I pulled up in the cab that we were back in the same place we were almost a year ago. It's kind of, things don't seem to move on. The world hasn't moved on, and the counties are still having the same meeting in the same hotel. Last year we were talking about devolution, unfair finance systems, what was the new government going to do? This year we're talking about devolution, unfair finance systems, what's the new government still going to be doing? Doesn't seem to have moved on at all. I was pleased to have sat in at that last one, because sitting behind Martin and Tony, listening to them cheer, if Lincolnshire gets £141 million extra, not only is the grass on all of the county highways land going to be cut more frequently, not only are all the street lights going to be kept on 24 hours a day, but the man who comes round to do the county's highways grass is also going to do my lawn as well, apparently, if the LGA pull it off. So kind of no pressure on there. But seriously, I think that presentation from an LGA perspective shows the task that's in front of the organisation and the difficulty that the organisation is going to have to get us through the business rates consultation process. I'm surprised the whole organisation is still holding together. Everybody is still talking about the core information that needs to be built into the formula, but I think once the conversations start about the winners and losers, that's when the organisation really is going to get caught out, unless there's some sort of agreement on that. And I don't sit in on those meetings. I only see, as the group leaders do, the fallout from those meetings. If there's going to be a need for such a massive shift in the limited resources that are available, there's no way the LGA is going to be able to sit at that table. We just will have to pull back from it, because there's no way we'll be able to argue for one type of council to be a winner if that means another type of council needs to be a loser. So for me, the bit about around future funding, the LGA needs to concentrate on the fact that there's not enough money in the system in the first place. On business rates, the government are taking half of the business rates off of us and spending it on other stuff. That's where the LGA needs to make its case. The 5.6 billion that we'll be underfunded by as a whole sector by the end of this Parliament needs to be the first call on that additional money, and that's where the LGA needs to make its case. It can't get into the space whether counties or London boroughs should get more or less than they're currently getting now. You guys through CCN will make that case, the guys through London councils will make that case. I'm sure Sir Gomer will make it for the Mets, and I'm sure DCN will do what DCN does for the districts. But for the whole sector, we need to win the argument as an LGA that the money is not sufficient that's in the system, but it could be if they let us keep the money that we're collecting. At the moment, there's about 11.5, 12 billion quid that the Treasury take off of us that we could have put back on the system. That's more than twice what we need to get a fair funding system based on the needs that we know about today. And let's not forget, most of those needs that we know about today are not ones in our control. You know, for stuff for adult social care, we now are not celebrating the fact that our country's living older, and we should be. It's flipping ridiculous when you can, in my election leaflets, I've claimed that people in South Holland are living 3 years longer than they were when I took over as leader. But, well, of course they are. That's a statistical fact. I'm going to take the credit for it, but wait. But we're not celebrating that. As a country, we don't celebrate the fact that people are living longer. We're now saying it's a bloody burden on society. We need to do something about that. We need to be able to turn that message around. And a way of turning that message around is by making sure that the system is able to fund the people that are in the system. And the money is there, but the Treasury currently take it off us. So we need to do something about winning that argument. So that's kind of funding. And you know I'm not a kind of a techie anorak, so I could never do anything with those slides that Byron put up from Leicestershire, but Martin has told me we'll have them over everything because Lincolnshire gets the biggest chunk out of what's going on, and I'm happy for that. Happy days. The other conversations I missed this morning, there's stuff around STPs, good, bad, indifferent. Again, it's not a subject area that I lead on. I don't get involved in anything that's to do with social services or the kind of health stuff or any of that, because it's all kind of not on my skill set. Chief Exec deals with the STPs. Chief Exec's the first Chief Exec from the LGA that's actually got in to talk to Simon Stevens on a regular basis. So we might not be getting a long way down that journey, but the working relationship is a sight better now than it's ever been between Simon Stevens and the LGA, and that's largely due to the work that Mark's prepared to put in on a personal basis. I know STPs in some areas are good, some are bad. Some say that the conversations need still to take place quietly behind the scenes. Some people are promoting that they should be coming forward and be pushed more into the public domain. Again, because there's no real consensus in the sector, it's very difficult for the LGA to articulate a position, particularly articulate it publicly. So kind of, you've had that row, I'm sure you'll have more of those rows, but talk to Mark about what your input is, because Mark can feed that in because he's in those conversations all the time. I probably should say a bit about the new DCLG team, because they weren't here last year and they are this year. On a personal level, my personal relationship with Greg, as you know from last year's meeting, was really strong. And that's changed with Saj. I did know Saj before he got the job, but I don't know him anywhere as near as well that I know Greg. So it's very difficult to use that personal leverage in the conversations. I'm pleased that he still meets with the leaders of all the types of councils. So David still meets him, Paul still meets him, David and Paul meet him, and they meet him differently as well. Neil Clark goes in to meet him, I meet him, and he didn't have to carry those on. He could have stopped those meetings, and he didn't. He kept those going. He kept them on the same day, and he kept the arrangement about turn and turn about in offices. Although now the LGA's moved itself up into North London, I don't think there's any chance of him coming up that far, unless he's going Newcastle or somewhere. I'm not likely to be doing that on a Wednesday morning. So I think it's more likely that meetings for the next year or so, or 9 months or so, will be held back into Marsham Street. But they're a good place to feed stuff in. And they're not only, whilst those meetings are Conservative leaders of different types of council that go to see him, when I go, which is most Wednesdays, I don't only go from the blue team, I go from the LGA team, and I do feed things in that come from different groups. So if you've got issues that you want to feed straight in, make sure you do carry on to feed them into me, because it's the best way of getting stuff underneath the Secretary of State's nose, because there's no intermediary between you and the piece of paper you pass over. We know he gets stuff because I give it to him, so I know he's got it, rather than it do the departmental run round. So a number of you do from different groups already use that, but make sure you keep using it. It's one of the advantages of having a decent working relationship with the Secretary of State. At least we can get to him. It's much easier to get to him to talk about the failings of other people's departments, because it's easier to deal with other people's failings, I suppose, than it is in your own team. But so we don't only use him for feeding in conversations about DCLG. We use him about DEFRA, we use him about MOJ. Obviously, we use him about the Treasury all the time, because they're generally the root of all evil lies in number 11. So that kind of does tend to be the main subject of not DCLG conversation. I'm not really sure what else I really should talk to you about. I don't like the sound of my own voice. I know you get bored with it really quickly as well. What I really need to do is make sure that you use my time here for you to tell me what we as an organisation need to be doing. I'm not going to take any notes, but Mark, the Chief Exec's here, and I always like to see a Chief Exec scribbling something. And I mean scribbling something, because he does it on that iPad thing of his with a pencil. I have tried swapping his pencil over just to see whether it makes any difference to the screen, but he hasn't caught out of that one yet. So really, kind of, you know I'm a district leader, and there's no need to have that row. You know, since well, I mean, it is a conversation. I have advised people all day long. It's not a conversation that we should really have started for ourselves. It's one that other people will use when they want to destroy us collectively, because that's where it would lead to. It will lead to mutually assured destruction. But that's a personal opinion based on previous experience. It's no guarantee that previous sales are a guarantee of what happens in the future. But my instinct is the more we talk about doing ourselves in, the more central government will love it, because that will divert us from taking them on, and we'll put too much resource in taking each other on, and I think we'll all be the losers for that. But I'm happy to have that conversation if anybody wants. Well, basically anything. What do you want me to take back to Smith Square? Well, not Smith Square now. To where are we now? Farringdon. Doesn't even sound anywhere near as good as Smith Square, does it? Farringdon. So that I can do what you need me to do. And you should know that when I took over as leader of the Conservative group 5.5 years ago, I stopped arguing the district case. I used to argue it all the time when I was chairman of DCN. When I took over as Conservative group leader, I started arguing for the blue team and for all of the blue team. And then when I become chairman, I stopped arguing for the blue team or the districts. I argue for all of us. And all of my arguments have been and will be, while I'm sitting in the chair, for us collectively, not for any individual bit of it. You've got fantastic champions in terms of the group leaders. So if you're blue team, red team, yellow team, whatever, you've got good group leaders who make the case for your colour team. You've got good sectorial champions. Paul pushes hard to the extent that sometimes I get fed up listening to him pushing the case in those meetings. But Paul does. Paul does push and articulate the county case, more so than maybe some others do in similar roles. I'm not going to say who, but Paul is a very, very good champion for the counties. You need to make sure you use him, and that's blue team counties, red team counties, whatever you are, he argues for counties. He doesn't argue for specific counties. When he's in those meetings, he argues for all counties. So you need to use him for that. But for the purposes of the next couple of minutes, however long we've got left, just fire stuff at me that you want me to fire on your behalf, or criticise me for stuff that I'm not doing, or ask questions about what the organisation's doing. But I'm kind of here, I can't run, there's no way off, I can't jump that far without breaking my old bony knees now. So whatever you want. So, Paul, just...
Yeah. Do you want to come and join us here or Secretary? Well, thank you, Gary. I mean, if I could just start with the first sort of comment for clarity. I mean, are you saying that you don't think the LGA are going to be able to arrive at a fair methodology to establish the baseline for local government financing? And if that is the case, then who should be doing that? Because I've always suspected that the conclusion that you're now beginning to draw would be the conclusion that you would arrive at. But who's going to start to set the pace for something that is fair and equitable to all before we start to superimpose commercial rate retention on the top?
I think we can take the process a long way down the line, so we can agree the evidence so that there's no questioning of the evidence base that people use to make their decision. But what we're not going to be able to do is get to the place where the decision is the one that the sector puts up in front of the government. So I think the County Council's network needs to do what you've been doing, articulate the case from a county perspective. I'm sure that the counties and the districts together will be able to make a long, you know, certainly that model that's sitting up there, that isn't just a county model, that's a county district model. Because it's counties and districts, because you're in county areas, whether the districts like it or not, the word counties is a proper word that describes more than just the governance model. The people who live in those areas belong to both of you, both counties and district councils. So that case should be made together. The London boroughs will make it. I had a conversation with the Chief Exec of London Councils last week at a meeting, specifically around the low levels of individual taxation in London, in some boroughs, compared with the personal spending power of the residents. And if you see the model on how that works out, you will see how, you know, not speaking on behalf of the LGA, purely speaking as a resident of Lincolnshire, we pay in my patch roughly £1,500 a year for a Band D. There is a London borough, and I'm not going to mention the borough, that the average wealth of the individual population there is considerably higher than mine, about 11 or 12% higher, but their council tax is only 400. So the population are paying a considerable lower sum when their available income to pay it is a higher one. And I can't make that case from an LGA perspective. I can from a linkage perspective or as a district councillor or whatever. I can make it at that level. But part of the thing of me taking on the role of chairman is I have to look after everybody, so I can't stand there. But you're not there doing that. You're there purely from the county area, so you'll be able to make that case all day long. And that's the thing. The organisation will default to the bits inside it. Sagoma will make the case for the Mets. I have no doubt that Steve Alton, who is a big champion for the Mets, will be having people working up the case why the Mets do not get enough money out of the available pot. That's what I say. All the bits, you can argue for the split on the pot. We, as an organisation, need to argue that the pot's not big enough in the first place. And it's not like we need fresh money. They just let us keep the money we've already raised locally. Business rates is 50% for us, 50% for the government. It never was supposed to be that. It was supposed to be 100% for us and local services. That's what it was brought in for.
And Sarge, I'll have to referee it. Brilliant.
Yeah, well...
Right, let's open it up. Yes, right.
Roy Perry, Leader, Hampshire, and Gary, thanks for what you had to say. The LGA represents councils and councillors. Yet it seems to me that we're losing the battle in convincing the government that councils and councillors are rather better than directly elected mayors. Do you think you're doing enough to protect the interests of councils and councillors and letting the government get away with this idea that mayors somehow or other are better than councils to do the job?
Yeah. Again, I think I'm on public record of actually saying I'm personally schizophrenic on the mayor issue. Sometimes I think it's a bad idea, sometimes I think it's a good idea, on a personal basis. Corporately, we think it's a bad idea. We think local areas should be free to determine the governance model that works for them best locally. I have given evidence to parliamentary select committees with that line. I've sat on there with the leader of Cornwall, with Nick, who's the Labour group leader, and with Anne, who's the leader of Derbyshire. And we all four of us said the same thing. The governance model should be determined at a local level. It shouldn't be for central government to determine what's best. On a personal level, I am schizophrenic about it. Some days I think, well, it's outrageous we're having this thing imposed on us. And other days I think, yeah, but it's only one more. And honestly, I am like that. Sometimes I don't care, to be quite honest. I want the money and the prize for me. I think that's the biggest thing. There was that little hiatus when Eric put the thing in the Sunday paper saying that new Prime Minister, maybe a new agenda. And that, I think the government were too slow in clearing up. I think if they definitely were going to stick with the model, and it clearly is the model they are going to stick with because they've said so several times now, then they should have made that clear sooner rather than later. And I think if they've been guilty of anything, it's the leaving a bit more of a vacuum where people didn't know. But we've just seen yesterday or the day before yesterday, there's some more stuff changing. Tony, I'm not going to embarrass him too much, but he's got an email saying actually the deadline's been shifted back for signing the deals off. I had a meeting with the Secretary of State on Wednesday, didn't get into our conversation. So is this agenda now moving at a day-by-day basis in a direction that seems to have a life of its own? I did say at Conservative Party conference that my money would be on no more than 5 deals getting over the line. I'm probably still on that level of betting, despite the fact that there were 31 deals on the table at the start. So clearly the sector hasn't bought into devolution the way the government wanted us to. And I don't know what we need to do to be able to move that. And it can't just be about a mayor, surely. I think Steve from Cambridge, I think that deal will go through. Norfolk and Suffolk, I think they're not playing nicely. I think that's fair summary, is it, Colin? I think Norfolk probably won't get over the line, but Suffolk will probably get a deal too on their own. The guys from the north and south of the Tyne, that you saw their vote, the South Tyne side voted it out, North Tyne side voted it in. The government are talking to North Tyne side, so there will be some deal that's just north of the Tyne, and kind of the southern guys probably will lose a big chunk of the money that would have gone to them because it'll be there. But we've just seen the growth fund money bids, and that makes a complete mockery of the whole thing. That's our new battle, if anything, from an LGA around this agenda, is if the growth fund is for growth, how have you got a model where the governance model gets in the way of that? Because that doesn't bear any relationship to the outcomes that can be delivered from the money. And again, that's been done without that conversation between us. So that I think will be the new battleground, rather than me arguing about whether a mayor's right or wrong. It's about how can you push the money into this place when you've already said it was for that thing over there. That's going to be the new battle.
Yeah, time for one, possibly two more comments, questions. You're getting off lightly, Gary.
Yeah, I know, but I'll pay for it later in the bar, probably.
There we go. Byron, final question.
Yeah, just picking up that point about the devolution deals. I mean, it would be silly if the government took the line, well, if you don't do it the way we want to do it, we're not going to give the money. Look, this is a government which is Prime Minister said will work for everybody. So if that deal isn't there, it shouldn't be taken out on the people that live in those areas. The money should come anyway. They should find a better way of doing it. And that's what the LGA should be asking for.
Yeah. But Byron, that does go back to what I've said. We said the governance model isn't the thing. That should be determined locally. It's the outcome we should all be focusing on. And it's not just the money. It's the freedom to do stuff at a local level better. That doesn't always require money. It just requires us in local government having more say and more control over what national government were doing in our patch. In mine, it's flooding's the big thing. I have to deal with an environment agency that's, well, given that there's journos in here, I can't say what I think about the Environment Agency, but I think you could guess from that what I do think about the Environment Agency. But it's like I collect 51% of my council tax to give to drainage boards. If I didn't have to give money to the drainage boards, I would be able to spend money on other things or take less money off my people. But there's no connection between the money that I collect for the drainage boards and the money that the Environment Agency spend in my area. I have no ability to influence that. And that can't be good for public services. It must be the same on the health stuff. CCGs, I mean, we know the difference on a good CCG is a good CCG. A bad CCG is a lead weight around your neck while you're trying to swim in a very strong tide. And it's that. We need better control over things like that. I have a bit of an hobby also about mental health. In my patch, if I had some more say in that, that money would go to where it's supposed to go. At the moment, it's not. It's going to underpin a failed business model for a lot of CCGs. But I can't do anything other than shout about it. Well, shouting is kind of not how you get things fixed, isn't it? You've got to be able to pull the levers to make it happen, and we don't have the statutory power to do that. And I think that's the real price of devolution. It's more control over what happens, not just the money. The money's nice, but the money ain't the be-all and end-all. It's about doing the stuff we do in a better way that gets better outcomes for people. That's the prize for me, sorry.
Brilliant. Gary, on all our behalfs, thank you enormously for coming along this afternoon and for your openness, honesty